Why hello there beautiful people, my name is Nelson Bullock, and in this video, I'm going to be doing a Pokemon Fire Red Hardcore Nuzlocke using only Poison Type Pokemon. The rules will be in the description, but in short, if a Pokemon faints, it's considered dead and I have to permabox it. I can only catch the first Poison Type Pokemon on each route, no items in battle outside of held items, Elite Four and Gym Leader level caps, and I'm playing on set mode. There are 12 different Pokemon that I can capture throughout this entire playthrough, and it all starts in Professor Oak's lab as I pick up a Bulbasaur, who I nicknamed Frisk. I do end up losing my first battle to my rival Zach, but how I do my hardcore Nuzlockes is the run doesn't officially start until I get Pokeballs, and at this point I didn't have Pokeballs, so I decided to continue the run. In Viridian Forest, I get my next encounter, a Weedle who I nickname Alphys. Alphys will absolutely get some burn later on in this playthrough, and I eventually do level her up into evolving into a Kakuna first, and then eventually a Beedrill as well. Although Frisk is going to be the one that really takes it to Brock, as all he does is just hit 2 Vine Whips to easily win our first badge. With Poison types only being weak to Ground and Psychic, a lot of these gyms are going to be relatively easy in this run. On the way to Cerulean City, Frisk evolves into an Ivysaur. And then on the way to Mount Moon, we catch a Nidoran who I nickname Asgore. He's going to be an absolute monster once he evolves into a Nidoking, but first and foremost, we evolve him into a Nidorino on the way to Cerulean City. The next encounter is in Mount Moon as we catch a Zubat who I nickname Lancer, though I will warn you guys ahead of time I do end up changing his name later on in the playthrough. We do end up catching an Ekans on Route 3, which some might consider to be an illegal encounter, but I'm gonna let it slide for this playthrough, and I nickname her Parsnip. I decided that I'm gonna battle Misty before the second rival battle, and once again, Frisk is able to very easily sweep through this team, although Misty makes it a little bit longer by giving her Staryu a super potion, but Frisk is able to 3-shot the Starmie without being in too much danger, and I got my second gym badge. Next up is the battle against Zach, right before Nugget Bridge, and he leads with Pidgeotto as I lead with Parsnip, and I immediately go for a Glare that paralyzes on the first turn. After that, Parsnip does get a Wrap in, but then I have to switch into Lancer as Pidgeotto is doing too much damage with Gust. Lancer's able to get a few more bites on Pidgeotto, and that takes out the bird, although Lancer's below half at this point. Next up is Abra, who only knows Teleport, so this is relatively safe, and I decide to switch into Asgore. And after a Focus Energy, I hit 2 double kicks to get Abra out of the way. Next up is Rattata, but only 1 double kick is able to take out that Rattata. And next up is Charmander. Asgore hits a double kick that just leaves Charmander above half. Charmander then responds with an Ember that would have been a little problematic if it burned, but it does get a crit. But then Asgore responds with a double kick that leaves Charmander with just a sliver. Charmander responds with an Ember that may have knocked Asgore out if it would have crit, but luckily I'm unpunished. Asgore hits 1 more double kick, and we have won our second rival battle of the run. Soon after that, I evolve Parsnip into Arbok, and on Route 24 I catch an Oddish who I nickname Flowey. But unless something happens to Frisk, I probably won't use Flowey for much of anything. Lancer then evolves into a Golbat, but that's as far as this evolution will go, as you can't get Crobat until you get the National Dex. I then decide to use the Moonstone to evolve Asgore into a Nidoking, and the reality is Nidorino's Learn set just isn't very good, so it kind of behooves me to do it now. Next up is the SSN battle against Zach, as he leads with Pidgeotto and I lead with Lancer. Lancer takes 2 quick attacks, but then 2 bites take out the Pidgeotto. Next up is the Kadabra, who's a little scary, but after I hit a bite, it just decides to go for Kinesis, and then 1 more bite takes out the Kadabra. Next up is the Raticate, which is going to be the last time we see this thing, as Lancer hits a bite and then gets hit with a Tail Whip, so I bring in Parsnip to get an Intimidate in, but he just misses a Hyper Fang, so I miss a Glare at first, then I go for a bite that misses, and then I go for another Glare that actually hits and fully paralyzes Raticate. So now I switch into Asgore. Raticate is once again fully paralyzed, and then Asgore just hits a double kick that takes out the Raticate. Last and certainly not least is going to be Charmeleon, but I taught Asgore Dig from the TM that we got right after we leave Cerulean City. Charmeleon misses a growl, and on the second turn of Dig, Asgore is able to get Charmeleon down to the red before taking a smoke screen. Even with the accuracy drop, I decide to go for Dig once again. The Charmeleon goes for a growl once again, and then Asgore comes up for a second Dig, not being fazed by the smoke screen, and we have defeated our rival once again. Right before I take on Lieutenant Surge, Flowey evolves into Gloom, and next up is our battle against Lieutenant Surge. But with Asgore on the team, this is mainly going to be a pretty easy battle. Asgore goes for a Dig against the Voltorb. They end up just going for a Sonic Boom that obviously misses, and then a Dig is able to one-shot the Voltorb with a critical hit that probably didn't matter. Next up is Surge's Pikachu, but again, we're going for another Dig with Asgore. As Pikachu goes double team, which could end up being annoying, but luckily Asgore is able to hit the Dig to one-shot the Pikachu as well. Last and certainly not least is Surge's ace Raichu, but once again we're going for Dig after shrugging off a very paltry quick attack. Raichu does annoyingly go for double team once again, just like Pikachu did, but Asgore once again hits through it, completing the sweep against Surge and winning our third gym battle. It's kind of weird that static hits now, but I'm not too worried about it. It's just an annoying use of a Cherry Berry. After getting through the rock tunnel, I decided to forego the Lavender Town shenanigans and go right for Erica. She ends up leading off with her Victory Bell, and I decided to lead off with Alphys, although this is a very questionable decision by me. Alphys goes for Twin Needle on the first move, not being able to poison the Victory Bell at all, but she does get a crit. And then her Victory Bell decides to go for a Stun Spore that she misses, and then Alphys goes for a Fury Attack that crits on the first hit. On the second one is just normal damage, and on the third one, it's also just normal damage, and then Victory Bell goes for Stun Spore, which connects and paralyzes Alphys. Alphys isn't really in any type of real peril, so I do keep her in on an Acid, and then Alphys uses Twin Needle once again, hitting for normal damage on the first one, and then critting on the second one, knocking out the Victory Bell. Next up is going to be Tangela, and this is essentially what I kept Alphys in, although Tangela hits Ingrain, and then Alphys annoyingly gets fully paralyzed. But Tangela can't really do much outside of use Constrict on Alphys, which causes very trivial damage, and then a Twin Needle is able to get Tangela down below half. As a bonus, it does poison Tangela as well, and after Ingrain healing and then poison damage, Tangela is still not quite in the red. Erica does end up using a full heal on Tangela to get rid of poison, but it's already too late, or at least that's what I would say if Alphys didn't get fully paralyzed. I can say it now though, as Tangela hits another Constrict and Alphys claps back with a Twin Needle, and out comes Vileplume to finish out the battle for Erica, and after a very weak Acid, Alphys gets fully paralyzed. She tanks another one and goes for a very weak Twin Needle. So I decided to stop playing with my food and switch over to Lancer, who hits an Aerial Ace down to red. And then after a Hyper Potion, Lancer gets fully paralyzed after getting hit with Stun Spore. And after tanking multiple Acids and getting fully paralyzed a couple of times, Lancer finishes off the Vileplume to get the victory. Next up is the Team Rocket Hideout matchup against the head honcho of Team Rocket, Giovanni, but Frisk is able to take out his opening Onix. Next up is Rhyhorn, who with another Vine Whip goes down, but next up is Kangaskhan, who's kind of a threat, and she hits with a very strong Mega Punch that hits Frisk below half. And I don't want to risk a critical hit, so I switch over to Asgore, who comes in on a very weak bite that's fully healed from Leech Seed. A double kick takes Kangaskhan below half, and after a bite, she gets poisoned due to Poison Point. And then I just decide to be a jerk and go for a dig as Kangaskhan faints due to Leech Seed and poison damage, winning me the first battle against Giovanni. Next up is the Pokemon Tower battle against Zach, and his Kadabra knows Confusion now, so it's not as free as the previous battles were. I'll lead off with Asgore against Pidgeotto, and Asgore immediately takes out the Pidgeotto with a Thunderbolt. Next up is Zach's Execute, and I decide to switch over to Alphys, which is a little risky due to Execute knowing Hypnosis, but it completely misses. And then Alphys is able to take out Execute with a quad effective Twin Needle. As expected, next up is Kadabra, and once again Alphys is able to hit a Twin Needle, outspeeding Kadabra, and one-shotting it with just one of the Twin Needle hits. Next up is going to be Charmeleon, so I decided to switch over to Asgore, who knows Dig, of course. Charmeleon goes for an Ember. That would be a problem if it burnt, but it doesn't. Asgore goes for a Dig, and on the first turn of Dig, Charmeleon just goes for Growl, and then Asgore comes back up and knocks out Charmeleon with just one shot of Dig. Last but not least is Gyarados, but even with Intimidate, I'm really not worried about this Gyarados since it doesn't know any water moves. Asgore outspeeds anyways, and hits a quad-effective Thunderbolt to take out the Gyarados, and getting our 4th victory over Zach. Our next encounter is a Ghastly within Pokemon Tower, who I decided to nickname Sans. And this is when I decided to re-nickname Lancer because I decided to keep the theme to just be Undertale instead of Deltarune as well, so I nicknamed Golbat Papyrus. On the way to Fuchsia City, Sans evolves into a Haunter, and that's as far as his evolution will go because the only way to get a Gengar is to trade it with another person, and that obviously is impossible. My next encounter is in the Safari Zone, and it's a Nidorina who I end up naming Toriel. And I definitely did not use her as much as I probably should have, but I do at least evolve her into a Nidoqueen, and she's essentially going to be insurance for Asgore, more or less. Now, the annoying part about this game is every time Papyrus levels up now with his happiness at max, he attempts to evolve into Crobat, and then it just doesn't happen. I don't know why they put this into the game, but they did it. Koga and Sabrina are both at a level 43 level cap, but I decided to go against Koga before any of the Silph shenanigans, and Sans absolutely walls this team like crazy. In other types of playthroughs, you'd have to worry about coughing and wheezing, potentially self-destructing, but with Sans being a ghost type, he's completely immune to it. He's also completely immune to Toxic, which all 4 of Koga's Pokemon know due to being a poison type himself. So in other words, Koga is about to have a very, very bad time. It's a relatively easy sweep with Sans, just some Psychics, and he does take a very meager Sludge, but then Koga just tries to heal, but he's just delaying the inevitable at this point. A couple more Psychics here, and Koga is as good as dealt with. Now that I can actually surf, I can get my next encounter, a Tentacool who I nickname Undyne. And Undyne's going to be very crucial to taking on the Elite Four, and I eventually evolve her into a Tentacruel, who's probably one of the best Nuzlocking Pokemon you can get. I finally decide to go to Silph, and I take on Zach for a 5th time, and now he has a Pidgeot, which he leads off with as I lead off with Asgore. Asgore goes for a Thunderbolt to lead off as per usual, but now it's getting to the point where Thunderbolt is going to be a 2-shot, and then Pidgeot just goes for a Feather Dance for Lord knows what reason. So one more Thunderbolt for Asgore will take care of the Pidgeot. Next up, Zach sends out Execute, so I send out Alphys on a Stun Spore, which connects. But this time I give her a Lumberry to take care of that. Next up, Alphys uses a Twin Needle that once again is quad effective and takes out the Execute. Next up is Alakazam, but we don't have a whole lot to worry about here outside of Future Sight, which could do some big damage later on in this battle if I don't take care of things quickly. But one Twin Needle is able to take out the Alakazam. And then Zach sends out his Charizard, so I have to switch Alphys out for her love interest Undyne. Charizard then hits a Flamethrower, but Undyne is very specially defensive, and on top of that, it's already not very effective against water types. Charizard goes for Smokescreen, but Undyne is Clear Body, so stat losses never happen. And Undyne hits a Surf on Charizard that doesn't quite take it out, and then she takes Future Sight's attack, and that's a little scary, especially when Charizard hits a Wing attack that would have just taken Undyne out if it crit, but I go unpunished, and Charizard is taken out with a second Surf. Out comes Gyarados next, which threatens with Dragon Rage, so I have to switch Undyne out here. And I decide to switch to Asgore, who doesn't have to worry about any water type moves and just tanks a really weak bite that procs Poison Point. Asgore is then able to hit a Thunderbolt that takes Gyarados out, of course being quad effective, and that gives us our 5th win against Zach. Now it's time for battle number 2 against Giovanni. He leads out with his Nidorino against Asgore, and he just misses a Horn attack as Asgore barely just misses out on the kill with Dig. But then after a Fury attack, he just goes for a Thunderbolt to take it out. And next up is Kangaskhan, who of course still knows Mega Punch. Asgore goes for a double kick that does about a third. Kangaskhan hits a rage back, and then Asgore goes for dig. After dodging a rage, comes up and knocks Kangaskhan below half. And then after another rage, Kangaskhan gets poisoned due to poison point, and then one more dig takes it out. Next up is Rhyhorn, and same thing. I feel comfortable going for dig since Rhyhorn doesn't know Earthquake. The first dig takes Rhyhorn below half, and the second one's able to knock it out after a pretty rough Fury attack. Now comes Nidoqueen up next, and then after missing a Poison Sting, she gets hit with a dig, but then hits Asgore with a Body Slam. But I feel good enough to go for another dig, and it takes out Nidoqueen, winning us the battle against Giovanni. Next up, however, is the toughest task so far in this playthrough, the battle against the Psychic-type gym leader Sabrina. She leads off with a Kadabra, and I decide to lead off with Alphys. And honestly, the tech here is to make sure Alphys can outspeed everything else on her team, so I go for an Agility, and Kadabra just goes for a Calm Mind. So Alphys is able to take out Kadabra with a single Twin Needle. She's then able to take out the Mrs. Mime with 2 hits of Twin Needle this time. And surprisingly enough, she's able to take out the Alakazam as well with a single Twin Needle. Next up is the Venomoth, and I really don't understand why Sabrina has a Venomoth on her team anyways. But I decided to try to go for Pursuit here, but that does very little damage, but she just goes for a Supersonic that she misses. And then Alphys goes for a Twin Needle that takes her just above half. And then Venomoth goes for Psybeam that does pretty significant damage to Alphys. Now she's in danger of a crit, so I have to switch over to Undyne once again. And then Venomoth goes for Supersonic, and it actually connects this time to confuse Undyne. I decided to just stay in and go for a Surf, and Undyne really shows why she is her, as she goes for a Surf and takes out the Venomoth, winning us the gym battle against Sabrina. So I didn't realize that you could actually catch Coughing elsewhere, but that ends up being my encounter at Pokemon Mansion, and I just nicknamed her Chara. I don't really plan on using her. There are some playthroughs where the 7th gym leader Blaine might actually be an issue, but in this playthrough, this is an Undyne sweep. Although Asgore and Toriel could also probably sweep Blaine as well. That's the problem with being a Fire-type gym leader though, as Growlithe, Ponyta, and Rapidash all go down to 1 hit a Surf each. Arcanine actually survives a Surf, but then just goes for Takedown, taking itself out due to Recoil, and there's the 7th gym badge for you. The 8th and final gym leader is none other than Giovanni, and again, this is another battle that's just way too easy. I lead with Undyne to take out the Rhyhorn, Dugtrio, and 2nd Rhyhorn. But then Nidoqueen comes out and she threatens with Earthquake, so I have to switch over to Sans, who has the ability Levitate, which makes it impervious to ground attacks. Sans then hits a Psychic that doesn't quite take out the Nidoqueen, and then she responds with a very meager Poison Sting. And then after a bunch of attempts to heal, Sans finally takes out the Nidoqueen and then one-shots the Nidoking, winning us our 8th and final gym badge. Now it's time for one final battle against our rival Zach, and this one is going to be tougher than all the previous ones. Pidgeot is his lead as usual, and I lead with Asgore, who leads off with a Thunderbolt that leaves Pidgeot with a Sliver, and then Pidgeot responds with a Wing Attack that doesn't do a whole lot of damage to Asgore. One more Thunderbolt takes out the Pidgeot, and now in comes Alakazam that actually knows Psychic now. And I make an absolutely foolish decision by switching Alphys in on a Psychic, and it just completely one-shots Alphys. In retrospect, the only other thing I really could have done is just preemptively did better EV training, but really nobody could have tanked a Psychic from Alakazam. Rest well, Alphys. I end up switching in Undyne, and she definitely wants to get revenge for her lover, as she hits 2 Surfs as Alakazam just goes for Calm Mind now. And then next up is Rhyhorn, and Undyne just goes on an absolute tear here, just tearing through the next few Pokemon that Zach has. As an Ice Beam takes out Execute, Undyne stays in against Gyarados and actually gets a freeze with Ice Beam, but the freeze ends quickly and then Gyarados sends up a Rain Dance. A Hydro Pump after another Ice Beam really doesn't do anything to Undyne, and she finally takes out Gyarados, leading out Charizard next, and due to the Rain Dance, Undyne's able to one-shot Charizard, winning us the final battle before the Elite Four. I honestly wasn't expecting Alakazam to come in that quickly, and that's really the reason that I ended up having to sack Alphys. But honestly, it was definitely avoidable. Again, if I would have done a better job with EVs in this playthrough, I feel like she'd still be around. But hopefully there's a big old bag of dog food in Pokemon Heaven for her to eat. So here are my final 6 Pokemon heading into the Elite Four. And honestly, I'm sure about 5 of these guys, but there is one that I brought on that I probably should not have, and you'll see why in just a moment. Lorelei is the first Elite Four member that we face, and she's actually the toughest of the Elite Four, as she can hit a lot of our Pokemon for super effective damage. She leads off with Dugong, and I end up leading off with Sands. Sands ends up hitting a Thunderbolt, which I taught him right before the Elite Four, and that does quite a bit of damage to Dugong, not quite taking it out, but taking her down into the yellow, and Dugong sets up a Hail, which I'm kind of confused by, but actually not, because it does give her an advantage. But it's just really annoying because Sands is going to get pelted with Hail Chip now, as Lorelei goes for a full restore. Sands then hits another Thunderbolt on Dugong, but again, it doesn't take her out, so I have to deal with this piece of garbage for another turn, while also getting hit by Hail Chip. Sands is finally able to take out the Dugong with one more Thunderbolt, and next up for Lorelei is Slowbro. Or Slow Sis, I should say here, and both of us get hit with Hail Chip. Sands then hits Slow Sis with a Shadow Ball that takes her just below half, and then Slow Sis responds with a Surf that takes Sands down all the way to the yellow. One more Shadow Ball from Sands is enough to take out Slow Sis, and then next up is Lapras as the hail stops. I switch out Sands for Undyne, and Lapras ends up hitting a Surf on Undyne that does very minuscule damage. I decide to use Toxic, but then Undyne just completely misses, and Lapras hits a Body Slam that does about a quarter. Undyne finally hits with a Toxic this time, and now we're just going to try to stall out this Lapras, but then she hits another Body Slam, and that takes Undyne below half, though it doesn't paralyze, thank the Lord. Knowing Lapras is never going to go for Surf in this situation, I switch over to Asgore, and then Lapras hits another Body Slam that thankfully doesn't paralyze. And then I make a complete foobar right here. The play here probably should have been for me to switch to Frisk, knowing that a Surf is incoming that Frisk would absolutely tank. What I do instead is probably one of the dumber moves that I've made so far in this playthrough. I switch to Parsnip. Now, I don't know why I brought Arbok onto my Elite Four team anyways, especially when I had Flowey and Toriel just hanging out in the box. I feel like the reason I brought Parsnip on was so that she could be what I wanted Alphys to be as far as taking out Psychic Pokemon. But I do hit a few more bites as Lapras takes more poison damage, but then Lapras responds with an Ice Beam that takes Parsnip down to 30, and I decide to just lay in the bed that I've made for myself. I stay in, get one more bite, as Lapras takes out Parsnip with one more Ice Beam, and this is just probably one of the most pointless deaths that have ever been in any type of Nuzlocke. I'm sorry, Parsnip. I done effed up. I then send in Asgore as Lapras' Citrus Berry procs, but then Toxic Damage takes it all the way down to a sliver, allowing Asgore to come in with a Thunderbolt to take Lapras down. Next up is Cloyster, but I'm really not too worried about Cloyster at all, as I just go for a Thunderbolt with Asgore here, and it one-shots Cloyster. Last but not least is Jinx, but again, I'm not too worried about anything Jinx can do to me here, although I guess Ice Punch is a little worrisome. Doesn't matter, Asgore hits an Earthquake, that's going to take out Jinx in just one shot, and we've defeated Lorelei. But again, it was just really stupid to bring Parsnip into the Elite Four. Next up is We Don't Talk About Bruno. He leads off with Onyx, and I lead off with Undyne, and Undyne is going to clap most of his team. She's still very pissed off about the loss of Alphys, as she claps both of the Onyxes. Next up is Hitmonchan, who she hits with a Surf, and that takes him below half, as he just misses a Rock Tomb, and then Undyne takes him out with a second Surf. Hitmonlee comes out next, and Undyne hits a Surf that brings Hitmonlee below half, but then Hitmonlee claps back with a Mega Kick that does pretty good damage to Undyne, but then another Surf takes out Hitmonlee. Last for Bruno is going to be Machamp, and Machamp might be a little tougher for Undyne to take on. She does hit another Surf, and that takes Machamp down to half before a Rock Tomb takes Undyne down to 67, and another Surf should kill Machamp, but it leaves him with a Sliver instead. He goes for a Scary Face that doesn't do anything due to Clear Body, and then Bruno decides to use a Full Restore on Machamp. So after one more Surf, I pretty much have to take Undyne out before she gets taken out. So I go into Frisk, and he eats a Cross Chop as soon as he comes in for not very effective damage. Frisk then hits a Leech Seed on Machamp, and then Machamp responds with a Rock Tomb that takes Frisk down to 118 and drops his speed. But now a Giga Drain takes Machamp into the red, and then one more Rock Tomb brings him down to 41, but Frisk is able to stay relatively healthy due to Leech Seed chip and due to Giga Drain as well, and he really just tanks anything Machamp can do to him. Although Machamp does end up getting a critical hit Cross Chop right here, Frisk finally takes him out with a Razor Leaf to finish off Bruno. Next up is Professor Oak's scorned former lover, Agatha, and she leads with Gengar, as I lead off with Papyrus. Papyrus hits an Aerial Ace to start things off against Gengar, then Gengar goes for a double team, which is really pointless because Aerial Ace can never miss, but then Gengar hits Papyrus with a Confuse Ray, which is healed due to a Person Berry. Agatha then heals Gengar, and then two more Aerial Aces can't take it out before another Confuse Ray hits, and then I just have to risk Papyrus hitting himself, but he does not do it as he takes out the first Gengar. Haunter ends up coming out next and misses a Hypnosis as Papyrus is healed from Confusion now, and he takes out Haunter in 2 hits. Next up is the stronger of the 2 Gengars that Agatha has, as Papyrus hits an Aerial Ace, Gengar responds with a Shadow Wall, and it's not too long before Papyrus trades a few hits, and then finally takes out the Gengar with a 3rd Aerial Ace. Next up, Agatha sends out her Golbat, but I don't feel like doing Golbat Ditto, so I just send out Undyne instead, who tanks an Air Cutter and claps back with an Ice Beam that just barely misses out on the kill, and Undyne is able to heal up from a Confuse Ray due to a Lumberry, and then 2 more Ice Beams take out the Golbat. Last and certainly not least, Agatha decides to traumatize me a little bit more by sending out her Arbok, and then Undyne actually freezes her Arbok with an Ice Beam, and then a Surf takes out Arbok, winning us the 3rd battle against the Elite Four. The 4th and final battle of the Elite Four is against Lance. He leads with his Gyarados and I lead with Sands, and honestly, my plan for this battle really didn't make a whole lot of sense in retrospect. I go for Hypnosis on Gyarados. He stays asleep for 1 turn, I hit a Shadow Ball, he wakes up and then hits a Dragon Rage. I should have just used Thunderbolt straight away, but I'm kind of dumb and I was just like thinking a little too much about this battle. I do put Gyarados back to sleep for whatever reason, and then I just hit a Thunderbolt to take it out. Next up for Lance is going to be his Aerodactyl, who hits an Ancient Power right away. That leaves Sands with just 10 HP, and I miss a Hypnosis. So now I have to switch to Asgore, who tanks an Ancient Power on the switch, and it poisons Aerodactyl. And then Asgore tanks a Wing Attack before hitting Aerodactyl with a Thunderbolt that takes him deep into the yellow. Then Lance decides to heal Aerodactyl with a Full Restore before Asgore hits another Thunderbolt. And I decide to stay in, and Aerodactyl hits a Hyper Beam that would have killed Asgore if it crit, but luckily I'm able to dodge the crit as he's down to 40 HP, and then he takes Aerodactyl out with a Thunderbolt. Dragonite's out next for Lance, and I just know he's going to go for an Outrage to take out Asgore, so I decide to switch over to Undyne, who is able to tank the Outrage pretty well. And then Undyne hits a quad effective Ice Beam that doesn't quite take Dragonite out, but Undyne will survive even a critical hit Outrage, and Dragonite doesn't actually end up critting anyways, so Undyne's all good. Dragonite's Citrus Berry procs and takes it out of healing range, and then one more Ice Beam takes out the Dragonite. Undyne takes out the first Dragonair with an Ice Beam, but then the second one survives on a Sliver, but gets frozen. Lance just kind of prolongs things by hailing the Dragonair with a Full Restore, And then Undyne just hits a Surf just so I can conserve some Ice Beam PP. That ends up being redundant though, as I have to use it anyways to close out this battle. And that's it for the Elite Four. So now there's just one more battle between me and completing this challenge. Of course, the final battle against our rival, Zach. As per usual, he leads out with his Pidgeot, and I lead out with Asgore. Asgore leads with a Thunderbolt that will take Pidgeot all the way down to the yellow, and he responds with a really trivial Aerial Ace. Asgore responds with another Thunderbolt that takes out the Pidgeot, and out comes Alakazam, who of course caused the first death of the run. I just decided to stay in as Alakazam goes for a Future Sight, and Asgore goes for a Mega Horn that one-shots the Alakazam. I wasn't really expecting that, but I'll take it. Next up is Rhydon, however, and I do have to stay in and allow Asgore to go down as I go for an Earthquake that just isn't going to do enough damage to take out the Rhydon. However, Rhydon's Earthquake will do enough damage to take out Asgore, and the King of the Monsters goes down. Rest well, King. Undyne comes in to clean up the Rhydon as she just hits a Surf to take him out. Next up for Zach is his Executor as Undyne takes the Future Sight attack, taking away a quarter of her HP. Undyne goes for an Ice Beam to try to take out Executor, but it's not enough to one-shot, and then something I was really dreading happens as Executor hits a Sleep Powder, putting Undyne to sleep. It was at this point where I totally forgot that I didn't put a Chesto Berry on Undyne, so I have to switch over to Papyrus, who takes an Egg Bomb for about a third of damage. Papyrus is able to clap back with an Aerial Ace, which takes out Executor. And now out comes Gyarados for Zach, and this is where I really just absolutely foobarred this entire battle. Papyrus hits a Poison Fang on Gyarados that actually gets the Toxic Poison on him, and then Gyarados responds with a Hydro Pump that takes Papyrus down to 61 HP. Now the smart play from here, as Gyarados takes some poison damage, would be for me to switch Papyrus out for Frisk. The only attacking moves that Gyarados knows are Bite, Thrash, Dragon Rage, and Hydro Pump, so Frisk would have mainly been okay to come in on this Thrash, but instead I keep Papyrus out, hit another Poison Fang, and then he goes down to a Thrash. Rest well, Papyrus. Sans comes in with revenge in his eyes, knowing that his brother just went down to this Gyarados, and after Gyarados takes a little more poison damage, Sans hits the dirty brother killer with a quad effective Thunderbolt that would have taken Gyarados out with full health either way. So that just leaves one more Pokemon on Zach's team, his Charizard. I can't switch to Frisk, otherwise he'll get clapped by an incoming Fire Blast, and Undyne's still asleep and there's no telling when she's going to wake up. So I have to stay in with Sans and hit a Thunderbolt as Charizard hits a Fire Blast. And Sans survives on 3 HP and claps back with a Thunderbolt. That gets a critical hit, knocking out Zach's Charizard and winning us not only the battle, but the entire run. I'm still very new to the hardcore Nuzlocking rules, so a lot of the mistakes that I made are probably mistakes that I'm gonna learn from for the most part, though I still will probably make them in the future. But as a whole, I feel like the Poison type Monolock was the best type of Monolock for me to get into as far as Nuzlocking goes. But anyways, I had a lot of fun with this one, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video just as much as I enjoyed playing through this game with Poison types only. Make sure you guys hit that like button, hit the sub button if you're new, and turn your notifications on as well. That way, every time I upload a video, you guys be notified. And we're going to keep it rolling here on this channel, and if you want to see more content from the channel, check out the playlist and the video in front of you.